Gamelit is a genre that has been around for a hot second. Most people who are familiar with the term most likely bring to mind Ready Player One or Sword Art Online, two of the more well-known Gamelit stories directly under the genre tag. However, it is a pretty rich genre with a great deal of books and comics to try out. This video, on the other hand, isn't a recommendation for Gamelit that I personally enjoyed or even think would be a good entry-level books for those unfamiliar with the genre. No, the core of this video is I think a lot of people would have a lot of fun writing Gamelit and that they should give it a shot. Hello, I'm the Starlight Necromancer, your favorite baddie keeper of the dead, and I read a lot of Gamelit. And I know a lot of people might not have read a whole bunch of it, but might find it really fun to write. Let me go ahead and get some terms out of the way. LiterPG, any story generally a novel, web serial, graphic novel, or webcomic, or in many cases anime, that utilizes RPG mechanics as a part of its storytelling and world building. This includes classes, levels, experience points, and a lot of nitty-gritty that exists in both tabletop RPGs and various video game RPGs, be they computer role-playing games or action role-playing games, for players to manage and build out their characters. Frequently, this is rolled into the setting's magic system, as they are one and the same. This is an umbrella term for all stories that use these kinds of mechanics in their storytelling. Not all LiterPGs same, and there are a handful of subgenres, but I won't be getting into them today. We'll be talking about Gamelit. Gamelit, any story that is taking place inside a video game or otherwise virtual world. No, really, that's it. I'll get into later how this may manifest, but this is the core of what a Gamelit is. As long as your story takes place entirely, or even mostly, within a game, any game, then it is a Gamelit. Why not? I only suggest it because I think it's neat and it's fairly untapped in terms of the genre's potential. Over the course of my life, there's been scant few things that are willing to take games and other virtual worlds and explore what that would mean for the characters. One of my most early exposures to what could be called Gamelit, most people wouldn't really call Gamelit without throwing their hands up and be like, I guess? To most of the guys in this genre, both as readers and writers, I would admittedly struggle to find someone who would agree with me that something like Code Lyoko or Reboot would count, despite meeting the definition that myself and many others in the LiterPG space uses, but I want to use them as jumping off points. All media is inspired by other media. Even the most truly original works you could ever think of has the fingerprints of everything that's ever been shaped by its creator. And players interacting with games is as much a story as the game itself. For example, Machinima. People loved the game so much they started making fan animations with possibly one of the most limiting tool sets you could possibly have, a copy of the game itself. The way that operates for the player means that they're going to have to tailor the entire script around the fact they're not doing this in Blender or Maya, they're using Halo, and that limitation will show. This isn't a video that's secretly about Machinima, don't worry, but I want to use this as an example for how this would affect your storytelling. Crash even lampshades this fact by making the fact that everyone's in-game model is a standard Spartan 3 be an actual thing that's relevant to the show's lore.
If asked by civilians or any non-EZ personnel, you are to present as Spartans. Any questions?
Camera, sir.
Oh, yes. You heard me right. You're all gonna be famous. The news is gonna be showing off our colors to all the colonies.
Sir, why are we presenting as Spartans, sir?
Spartans are an invaluable resource. This armor, as I'm sure you have all noticed, bears an uncanny resemblance to the current generation of Spartan armor.
They're not Spartans, they're just wearing armor that happens to look suspiciously similar to Spartans. Enough so that they can even fool the Sanheli ambassadors into thinking that the diplomatic event has more security than it actually has. When I say you have to commit to the bit, this is what I mean. You have to be absolutely willing with the fullness of your heart to embrace the fact that all or part of your story is taking place in a digital landscape where limitations that wouldn't exist for characters in real space are now something you have to consider. Sword Art Online, for all the points where it's a terrible series, top to bottom, not accurate to any sort of game at all, and even the interactions between characters is questionable at best in terms of quality, understands that this series is set in a game. A full dive VR game, but a game nonetheless. But even for all its many flaws, the creator tried to approach it from the perspective of what that would be like. Players who killed other players were marked with a visual symbol, something that Dungeon Crawler Carl, one of the more successful System Apocalypse LiterPGs right now, makes great use of, not just in its world building, but its plot and characterization. Gonna be real here, Dungeon Crawler Carl, for all of what's happening in that series is happening in reality rather than a virtual world, commits to the idea harder than a lot of LiterPGs bother to, which is kind of a fucking problem when you're writing in a genre where this is kind of the whole point. What appeals to LiterPG to me, specifically, is that it's digging into a few things. How aspects of a piece of media affects an individual or a whole community. How technology shapes our interactions and frequently replaces with others and third places entirely.
Hold on 1 second, I'll be right back. Marcus? Dude.
Robert.
There were mollusks and the alcohol.
What?
The way that reality and fiction starts to blur for its players. Even without the trapped in the game trope, there's a lot of ground one can cover. One of the most heartwarming stories I'd seen is something that could be considered part of this was, oddly enough, Final Fantasy XIV Dad of Light. A mini-series about a father and his adult son rekindling their bond after a cancer diagnosis through the MMO. It was really sweet. Or in the other direction, Stay Alive, a horror movie about a haunted video game that when you die in the game, you die in real life. Or Server Blight, a horror web series about an entity within Team Fortress 2 that's trapping people's consciousness in the game. There's plenty of room to explore what this medium means for us, what it does to us and for us. Games are a part of our life, and for some of us, it's our entire community. So what do you have to say about that? The message I want to impress upon any potential Gamelit author is that in order for a Gamelit to be enjoyable, you have to commit to the idea that this is a game. And not just in the bug department. The way that people act in-game is markedly different from the way that they act out of it. There may be role players, both in the full LARP sense, and just those who want to get in the mood for raid to hype everyone up. Truly, some of the best examples I've ever seen of player behavior reflecting in-game events has to be EVE Online propaganda from various corporations. You have to know who you're writing for, and if you're hoping to get players who are deeply experienced in the genre or trying to emulate a popular game, then you need to do some research. If you're hoping to get those who are only casually interested, then you're going to need to do some research. Knowing where to start is half the battle. And as such, the ever-present question before an author is, what genre should I write? That, my friend, really depends on what kind of game the cast will be playing, what kind of games you're intending to draw inspiration from for how they work mechanically, and how those mechanics might be presented thematically. The genre will obviously set the tone for what you're doing. Halo, for example, is a very straightforward military sci-fi. It has all the dark intrigue one would expect of a military sci-fi, and a dash of horror when you take the Flood into account. The Dark Souls series tends to be about cycles in some manner or another, the grinding of the player into a hopeless pulp with failure after failure, but learning with each mistake in a rich lore-filled world that they have to go out of their way to learn. Or, just read the wiki or watch a lore explain video. Stardew Valley, on the other hand, is supposed to be about restoring your grandfather's home and hometown to glory after being left behind in an ever-advancing, ever-encroaching spirit of capitalism, hell-bent on extracting as much profit from them as possible, or, the player deciding to become host to that spirit to the town's detriment. Now mind, these games are primarily single-player. They do have multiplayer elements such as invasions and summons for Dark Souls, pure PvP for Halo, and effectively being the host player's farmhand for Stardew Valley. Every game has a multitude of things that tie to it that defines how it was intended to be experienced. Some are more cinematic, while others are incidentally so due to interactions between players, and some manage to do both because of the amount of players that are around to interact with each other and because of the intended design of the game. Now, it is my opinion that the genre you pick should be tied to what game you are choosing to draw inspiration from. MMOs are great for large social dynamics and examining communities and how they interact with crisis and other points of conflict. Likewise, as I said before, you're doing a gamelet and you must be committed to the bit. I cannot emphasize it enough. For example, in EVE Online, large-scale battles have to take into account that the region will be laggy as hell. If it helps to picture it one way, I recommend reading Expeditionary Force by Craig Allen Smith. The space battles in this series operate about as close to what is probably realistic for sci-fi, and frequently has to take into account the vast distances between ships, as frequently remarked by Joe Bishop as the, quote, slow crawl of the speed of light. Galaxy's Edge likewise has an approach to space battles that might be a useful point of reference, both being more standard military sci-fi. However, this time rather than having to account for the speed of light, tactical operations has to take into account for time dilation, or tie-dye, when taking part in these fleet battles, a mechanic introduced by the devs to try to reduce the amount of lag generated by these large-scale battles. And even with tie-dye, there's still a pretty large amount of things for a given tactical officer for an EVE corporation to keep in mind. This is only one aspect of how one would manage conflict in a gamelet, and that's in the context of one style of video game. I'm not asking you to become a game dev. In fact, most lit RPGs are not games you would ever want to play, even from the well-written ones that are the peak of the genre. As a game, they would, objectively speaking, fucking suck. They'd be awful in about every aspect of the word. Knowing how encounter design, class design, etc. all work might help some, especially if you've actually made games or mods before, but it's not a requirement. One of the questions that gets asked a lot when new writers to the genre ask how much crunch is too much crunch. I think the answer to this is a little more loosey-goosey in other lit RPG subgenres, but in Gamelit, I think the answer is honestly crunch frequently exposes how little one has experience with games. One could say the same thing for the way that tabletop RPG systems are used in other aspects of the genre, but I think readers will grade things like that on a curve, whereas with Gamelit, those who have experience with the flavor of game you're basing your story on will have the same exacting critique of it that medical professionals will have for shows like House or Grey's Anatomy, except some of your choices will have an even lower bar for entry. Decide on the direction you want to go. Cozy lit RPG is a thing now, you know? So if you did want to look at games with a much more lower bar of entry when it comes to research material, you could very easily poke around your Stardew Valleys or your Palias. I would also argue that No Man's Sky is a cozy game, but that's not a hill I'm going to die on in this video in specific. And those who are familiar with these sorts of games can tell you how absolutely heart-wrenching some of the narrative beats are in them. I think another interesting point of reference would be to look at games that did get their adaptations to something else, be it a show or, in the case of several games, books. Halo has many novels, a TV series that's dog shit, comics, and graphic novels. You can't forget the machinima. Halo is one of the only games that expressly supports machinima, even to this day. No, seriously, boot up the Master Chief Collection. Bungie put theater mode in the game specifically because of fan works like Red vs. Blue to make Rooster Teeth's jobs easier. But even without officially supported means to make machinima, people still did it. Illegal Danish was recorded directly in World of Warcraft just by turning the UI off and looking around as needed. And given that it came out in 2006, they were still in vanilla when that specific one came out, and they didn't have flying to help them. Though Captain Grimm has kept the tradition alive for some time with some machinima-like animations. Why I bring up machinima is because it showcases potential direction for how one could take writing. Take into account the limitations that one would have in telling their story, and maybe enjoy some newer projects. To keep this from going too far off topic, let me just say that there's a reason why the vast, overwhelming majority of scenes in Red vs. Blue and Crash are of guys standing around talking. Max Brooks as well did write a legitimate, officially licensed Minecraft portal fantasy that's been on my to-read pile since basically I found out it existed. But even from just the bits of it I've seen posted online, I feel like talking about potentially writing a gamelet would be a missed opportunity to not make more people aware that the guy behind World War Z and the Zombie Survival Guide effectively wrote one. I know I've spent a lot of time finding new ways to say you need to commit to the bit, but that's one of the reasons why I'm harping on it so much. It's a very common problem within Gamelit to be reading a story and then left wondering, when was the last time the author even looked at a game, let alone played one? It's why I point to other pieces of media that tries to capture the vibe and what we like about games, also trying to weave them into their narratives. Let's look at Gamelit for a moment with how some are trying to emulate the feeling of an MMO but in a full dive VR type setting. What kind of game are these people playing? Why? What's the story of the game? Its lore, world building is nice and usually got deeper into during side quests and zone content, but what you really need to ask yourself is, if I saw this game in Game Informer, would it be interesting enough to even bother picking up? A lot of the time, protagonists of Gamelit are already gamers who are balls deep in the community and likely won't need much to sell them on something if it's going to eat up hours upon hours of their time to the exclusion of any other game, or hobby for that matter. However, even if we write assuming most readers haven't played an MMO, which is very likely, MMOs are not very popular as a genre and are kinda on the downslide for a variety of reasons. Readers need more than, he's in the game because we need him in the game for plot reasons. Let's look at No Man's Sky for a moment, because in my honest opinion, this is the type of game a lot of authors are trying to emulate, while also throwing in a dash of vanilla World of Warcraft there, and maybe some tropes thrown in from Korean MMOs that float around the genre as a whole. The entire story of No Man's Sky is optional. You can play it for hours upon hours and not really engage with it at all. It's entirely your choice. If you want to fuck off and base build, you can. If you want to become the dread pirate lord of the Euclid Galaxy where all Gek tremble at the mere mention of the flagship, the Dirge, the first spawn, that's an option for you. While an MMO this does not make, the way that storytelling is presented in No Man's Sky vibes a lot better than what is usually presented in Gamelit MMOs, especially for modern MMOs. Like, man, I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes to do the stuff that's worth doing, you gotta do the main story quests. Patch content can reliably be locked behind the MSQ. You wouldn't just be world building for one setting, but two. Especially if in your story they aren't trapped in the game but go between the virtual world and the real one. But you have to be able to answer the question, why are they in a game? And does this still work or even work better if I remove the game elements from it? Ready Player One can't work without the game. Snow Crash can't work without the metaverse. Spiteful Healer can't work without the game. To what end is the game important and what are you trying to explore? You did it! You wrote the thing! And now you're ready to share it with the world. Now, where do you do that? Good news, you have a lot of options, but I'm going to mainly focus on a few. The first is Archive of Our Own. AO3 is frankly one of the best places to post writing to, and I'll get to why in a moment, but what I want to get to first is probably the most important thing about it that will almost certainly dissuade you from posting there in the first place. AO3 is not where you post anything you intend to make a profit off of or published as a quote-unquote real novel. Anything and everything you publish here is a declaration from you to the archive that this is finished work, that there is nothing meaningfully different from your original work when compared to your average fanfiction in terms of engagement with vanished culture and art. And I don't care if your publisher gave you special permission to post to AO3 before you got your novel published for realsies. When you post here, you're posting for the love of the game. This means no Patreon, no Ko-fi, no PayPal donation link, no advance or extra chapters locked behind a paywall, anywhere. You aren't to be posting to try to build an audience for it to get popular enough to be publishing into an actual book. This isn't me just taking a hard stance for the preservation of fan culture and fan spaces. This is a matter of AO3's terms of service. If you want to write a gamelit and post it to AO3 as an original work, you are declaring to the world that there isn't a meaningful difference between it and fanfiction. I am fully aware that people do this anyway, and are never punished for it, and a lot of it is just the fact that moderators aren't all-knowing and rely on reports to take action. I'm fully of the opinion that if you take your fanfiction and go off to make it a real book, then you should be permabanned off of AO3 because it is directly breaking the TOS. This is a different video topic entirely, and maybe I'll make that video, but if you have any takeaway from this section, it's that anything you put here is not for profit. If none of that's an issue for you, then it's a project that fits the archive's mission of providing a place for finished works. Then it's one of the best places to post something, given its extensive tagging system, lacks restriction on story content, and support for CSS and HTML within the fic. If that's an issue though, I can suggest an alternative. NeoCities. NeoCities is the new age version of GeoCities. It's just straight up your own website. As far as I can tell, there's no restrictions in their TOS for you writing more NSFW. But given the current political landscape as regards to anything that isn't pure, wholesome Christian content, I can't make promises that this will be the case until and unless sex worker rights become an issue people care about outside their porn sites requiring you to give them your ID. So you could have whatever you wanted here, but you would also be responsible for getting the word out entirely through external sources and for maintaining a web ring to help get the word out for anyone else writing a web novel in your circle. Whereas every other option I can provide, that responsibility isn't on your shoulders. But since it is your own site, you have the freedom not just in what you could post, but how you post it. If you want to do up the website code in such a way that lets you write a House of Leaves-ass gamelit and you have the skills to do so, do it. That would be sick as shit. If you're looking for the place to post LitterPG as a whole, Royal Road is probably it. It's a little more limited in what you can post there. Erotica is banned, for example, and you don't have user tags to put on your work. You only have the tags available to you that the site staff have given you. On the one hand, it can benefit authors by helping push their works to readers who might like them, and there's not an insignificant amount of people on Royal Road who would eventually go off to get their works published by one of the handful of publishers who more or less exclusively work within the LitterPG and progression fantasy space because they got onto Rising Stars. On the other hand, it pushes a meta to help ensure that success often comes at the detriment of both author health and quality of work. This can lead to a lot of word count padding that plagues the genre, often taking the form of excessive system notifications, re-explaining concepts to readers that they should already be familiar with, or even wholesale replacing combat writing with just a text box telling me what the spell Fireball does instead of showing me the character casting Fireball. Genuinely, don't do the meta unless you already have a massive backlog to keep up with it. If you're writing it with your posting days as your deadline, it's a surefire way to hit burnout. Not everyone has the financial means to slap out a chapter a day without hitting some kind of stress. We're not all Zogarth. That man is built different. There's a lot of advice I could give you to deal with this, but it really all would boil down to don't chase the meta and keep your health in mind when you're writing. Emotional, mental, and physical. Typing can be hard on you too. Learn the signs of burnout and attend to your needs accordingly. This is Starlight from the edit here. As it turns out, there's actually a pretty significant amount of things you can do with Royal Road's HTML and CSS. While not nearly as expansive as AO3 or NeoCities, if you're familiar with those two languages, I encourage you to experiment and see what you can get away with. At time of recording, a guide hasn't been made specifically for Royal Road, but if one does get made, I'll find it and link it in the description below. Shout out to Royal Road user Lethal Resonance for sharing this with everyone over on our Progression Fantasy. As far as prohibited content goes, Royal Road lays out in good detail what they expect of their authors and likewise expect you to have good sense about the dark topics that you want to put in your work. Check out the knowledge base for a more detailed look about what they expect of you. This site has more or less everything that was good about Royal Road, but it also allows smut. Given the current issues with payment processors, however, I wouldn't pin your hopes on it if you're wanting to write works with erotic scenes or themes. Look into backups and alternative sites just in case MasterCard and Visa get ideas again. Much like Royal Road, they only work with a series of tags that the staff themselves have given as options, though it is far more expansive in its offerings than Royal Road. However, The vagueness of Scribble Hub's prohibited content section sets my teeth on edge. For most people, this won't matter. It's pretty unlikely that most people watching is going to write something like "Everybody loves large chests" or similar erotic stories. I feel it is my duty to try and inform people of their options if they wanted to, though. I don't post to Scribble Hub, so I would recommend speaking to writers who do post adult scenes there about their experiences, especially if they don't write typically vanilla scenes. There's far, far more options than the ones I just listed. Even Campfire has their own web novel section of its service that it offers as part of its ecosystem. Some sites are tailored for non-English languages, and others just have the room available for anything but English. Explore, experiment, and be open to other platforms, as there's never any one that'll be a sure thing, especially at these trying times of the internet. I genuinely hope that people try their hand at this genre. As I said, I think it's neat, and I think people don't give Gamelit or LitRPG in general enough credit for its potential, often writing it off as empty escapist fiction for men. If you'd like to support me in the things that I do, I have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, though with everything going on with payment processors, I begin to fear that Twitch is a safer method of supporting me right now as a creator. At least if you drop some subs, you'll get some emotes with it that you can use in Discord. If you have suggestions for a video topic, put them down in the comments below. One of my planned works is a video about Project Hail Mary, and another about warm bodies. Thank you for joining me in the sanctuary, and I hope you have a wonderful day.